Hi there, folks. My name is Rich Severin. I am a physical therapist and physiologist based out of Chicago, at the University of Illinois at Chicago and Baylor University. So I've been asked to talk to you guys a little bit about successful tips for being more productive at writing. So the way this will go, we'll kind of go over just some basic general tenets of how to be, I guess, how I've been able to be relatively productive with writing early in my career, especially. And then we'll go over some technical skills for improving your efficiency with writing. So let's begin. So the first thing I'd say actually that really helped me or helps me, and really most authors, if you find those who people who publish often, probably the three most important things that they do is that they read often is the first one. So making sure that you just stay current with reading the literature. As you move further into your career, what you read starts to narrow down. I mean, like for myself, it's really just focused on now very specific areas of respiratory physiology, obesity, sleep, and like epidemiological hypertension. But the more you can read, the more that you're aware of what's out there, the more gaps that you find in the literature, and that leads to novel inquiries, perspective papers, and that gives you kind of the impetus to write, right? It gives you something to write about. So the more you stay up to date with reading journal articles as they come out, the better off your writing will go. Using social media can help with that. I really recommend pretty much everyone in academia to get a Twitter account, a ResearchGate account, or at least a Google Scholar account, so you can kind of get stuff pushed to your email list. I'll include in the links to this video a little quick tips for staying up to date with the research that I wrote a few years ago that kind of talks about different things that you can use that are free for staying up to date, including some great resources through the National Library of Medicine. The other that I would strongly recommend as well, and you see a lot of really good writers do this often, is they review papers often. So you see, I felt this early on in my career that what really helped get me better at writing was not only reading papers, but reading papers with a critical lens, right? So which is what you do in peer review. So I think that helps. One, you kind of see what it takes to get a paper through publication, especially with a particular journal. And then it also just, I think, just like anything, like teaching back in a certain sense, kind of what peer review is. Like you're reviewing, just like you're reviewing papers for students. The more you do that, the better your, whatever you're reviewing or grading gets. So I find that the more often that you peer review, the better. Now, obviously, be sensitive to your workload, but I feel that the more often you're able to review, the better it will be for your writing, especially earlier on. Try to review papers pretty early on in your career, and you can be more selective as you kind of get further along. And then, this is kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of, that's something that may be cliche advice, but I'd say probably the most important tip is just to write often. Writing is something that you just can only get better at by doing, just like anything, but especially with writing. And we'll get into some things you can do to kind of be sensitive to your time and development. But the more often you write, even if it's a little bit, in a weekend, or even if it's not something scholarly, just getting better at writing, getting better at putting your thoughts onto paper. So that's something I'd really just recommend. Write often, even if it's not scholarly, just get stuff out. And then some strategy that I'd recommend as well too. Writing groups. So if you look at most of my papers, I've had I think a handful of 2-author or single author papers. Most of my work is collaborative work. You develop basically writing in teams. I have a couple of teams for different things that I write about. A core team here based in Chicago. We pump out a few papers, but I think that helps. I think a lot of people often think you have to write a full manuscript by yourself, like outside of your dissertation, if you do a PhD or any terminal degree, like, very rarely are there sole author papers. The most prolific writers will, be writing in groups, throughout their career. And I'd say too, that helps because like sometimes like you'll be the lead author for a paper. Sometimes you'll be a middle author. Sometimes you're the senior author. It is really important to know, like, in your writing groups, like your policy for authorship, like always make sure you have that, established prior to engaging in writing a paper, like know like what constitutes like a meaningful contribution. Some journals actually tell you what qualifies as that, but that's something you want to make sure you have. But those writing groups can be great because it offloads the work that you do, and you kind of cycle through. So I'd strongly recommend writing in groups. The other is something I took from a colleague of mine who's now based at UNLV, Tessa Hilgenkamp. She was a postdoc here in Chicago when I was finishing my PhD. And I kind of took this message to heart when I was, first starting to kind of really get into writing often. She has this rule, and maybe I'll call it the Dr. Hilgenkamp rule, or the Tessa rule, of the rule of two. So over a course of a year, and really throughout your career, you kind of want to always have two papers that you're working on, two papers in the pipeline, like that are in review, like being able to get, like soon to be published or soon to be accepted or not, and then two, like in press, ready to come out. And that really, I think, like, again, like that may be a lofty goal for a lot of people, like, but if you're trying to get a lot of publications out a year, like you really need to kind of almost develop a pipeline, right? That you're constantly working on things. And it goes back to all those core tenets of writing often, reviewing often, working in groups. And that's a lot more doable if you're doing things in groups too. But even if it's just a rule of one, like you're working on one paper's in review, one paper's ready to get out, I think keeping that in the back of your mind that, hey, of what you should be aspiring to in terms of being productive, right? So, some people, they have 4 or 10 papers in the pipeline. Like that's beyond me, but I think 2 is pretty reasonable. And maybe it's not always exactly going to work out that way, but just knowing that, hey, like I got to stay motivated to kind of keep something, churning out, right? And then the other, as I'd say as well, probably the most important thing to bear in mind, and I think doing some of the other things we talked about, peer reviewing often, will help you get used to this, is do not be afraid of rejection. Being a successful, productive writer in any field, but especially in scholarly publication, you're going to face a lot of rejection. It's a tough thing to deal with because most people in any profession, in any field, like you're used to success, right? Getting good papers out, publishing often, like you're probably going to face a good bit of rejections along the way. Not the end of the world, right? Don't take a really like mean, peer review to heart, right? Like view it as, hey, someone actually took time to review like my work, right? And if they rejected it, another journal is going to take it, right? So always kind of have in the back of your mind that, hey, if it's not a home here, there'll be a home somewhere else, right? So don't be afraid of rejection. Use it, as a tool, right? As information to help, the next time you submit. So don't be afraid of rejections. It's just part of the process, and like you'll get better at it as you go. And then the other probably important thing that I'd say, and I know like everything I've said so far sounds like hyper focused on productivity, like right all the time, review, all that stuff. Like it is important to take breaks occasionally, right? Like while there was that rule of 2 that I genuinely say, like, there are periods, right, we're going to be, more productive than not, right? I'd say like, I take sometimes if I went through a period where I'm just pumping out a lot of papers, I take like a month or so off and just like, maybe I'm working on a few things, but I'm not actively like submitting stuff for publication. I'm taking time to kind of like just, refocus and, rejuvenate myself before getting back into the grind of writing often. So And everyone's going to be a little bit different. Again, this is just general advice. That it's kind of what I typically follow in terms of general approaches to being productive. But I do stress the importance of taking breaks occasionally. Don't make them too long, right? But whatever is going to work within your lifestyle, to kind of keep you, a balance between productivity and and obviously health and all that other stuff that's important too. So these are the general tenets of writing. The next I'm going to follow up with some technical skills, some things that I think may be helpful resources for you guys in getting more effective with your writing or productive.